Go to jail. Go directly to jail. You are deviant. You are bad. So now look at this. Now your grandparents might think one thing is deviant, and your mom another. And of course, I think biting an ear off is definitely so. But tattoos and piercings, is that deviant? So if we think about it, deviance across cultures does vary. It's relative to the culture you come from, the background that you have your mores shaped from. For example, in Ohio, the rebel flag is considered deviant. Back home in Alabama, it's not. It would be considered classy. Now here's two terms that I don't quite get. I mean, I understand the negative deviance, which is involving behaviors that is not acceptable. But positive deviance, how can that be so? To me, positive deviance would be Rosa Parks in the sit-ins, but not in the sociological preference. What it's referencing is that the deviance that is looked at is imbalancing, but is part of our mass media, or the part that allows us to think we're inadequate. So we practice in things that normal society would think is deviant. That is positive deviance. So deviance is an action or behavior that does not conform to norms. That it creates a life that is unpredictable or chaotic. So we've already discussed the concept of formal and informal sanctions, and that's how we try to control deviant behavior. That is that behavior that is unpredictable. Most of what society looks at here is that you exert on a day-in, day-out basis, from the hallway behavior to the classroom behavior, is more of an informal manner, or what we also would call de facto. But formal sanctions, or de jure sanctions, then have usually come from deviant behaviors that society deems as not just unpredictable, but downright dangerous. For example, red lights. Or also, if you have formal sanctions, you may actually be able to see what society values. So, for example, stealing or shoplifting, private property and profit margins are incredibly important in a capitalistic society, so they've become formalized or put into a place that is actually more important than acting deviant in an elevator that we talked about. You won't get punished for that. You'll just have people get out immediately. So another formal term is social sanctions, and they are just rewards or punishments designed to encourage a desired behavior. So they can be both positive and negative sanctions, such as a bonus or a ticket. For example, if you don't get speeding tickets and you don't get any car accidents, you have a positive sanction from your insurance company, which lowers your rates or gives you a bonus check. Where the negative sanctions for those would be a monetary fine that you would have to either pay for the insurance company increasing your premiums, or also that monetary fine that you could get for speeding tickets. Yes, that is McGruff. So here is the functionalist approach to deviance. In other words, what are the costs? What are the benefits from that? What dysfunctions does deviant behavior cause, and how can we fix those? Of course, it erodes trusts. Additional cost to society is that to punish or to curb this deviant behavior becomes expensive, so that also adds additional dysfunction. Then if we think of alternative music, or a way to exert your independence from your parents by listening to certain music, so it's still deviant behavior, but it allows a safety valve to relieve social pressure between you and your family. Then you have the terrible issue with 9/11, it's a terrorist activity, but they did unify our country, so there was an incredibly deviant behavior. It was, in the terrorist actions. However, ultimately, it led to a functional approach, which would say that we came together, served a purpose that was actually benefiting society in the end. So you can look at it from two different points of view, one being bad, but the ultimate outcome could be ultimately good. So the next step. So now we're looking at the structural approach or perspective in strain theory. And this looks at that deviance occurs when there are certain goals that society places upon us are higher than one can achieve through legitimate means. theory does incorporate in major part that which the norms of society become weak or conflicting or absent because at some point you have apathy and become disengaged with normal society mores, and that is anomaly. So here are 4 responses that one might take in considering the ability that you cannot necessarily conform and ultimately will be deviant behavior. Even though you might be innovative, such as using your problem-solving skills that we teach you here at Cathedral, however, you can't quite meet the goals displayed by society still, so you use illegal means to obtain those, such as robbery, drug dealing, things again that are considered deviant on themselves. Ritualism is when success is rejected, but legitimate means are still used. So in other words, you will continue to be just doing what you need to do to get by in society, or at least in our society, looks at the fact that that may not necessarily be the main goal, that success should be the main goal, not just to get by. And ultimately you look like you're doing your job, going to work every day, but ultimately you really aren't doing it. Best example of this is the lazy teacher who continues to go to work every day as part of the job, but puts no effort in. So technically that's deviant. And then we have retreatism. Both goals and means are rejected. So you no longer worry about your goals and you no longer take action to do anything about it. This would be homelessness and a drug addict, those folks that are walking around in the streets. And then last one is rebellion. Rejection of goals and means, but a new set of goals and means are formed. Out of all of these, rebellion at times can recreate a new set of goals, a new set of norms, if done in a positive format. The example given, though, is violent behavior against law enforcement. A positive way to look at dealing with this would be the sit-ins during the civil rights movement. And here is another perspective called control theory, which is also similar to the strain theory, but it looks at its deviance occurs when people do not feel connected or have close ties to the community. The community, or the people in your community, are the ones that help control and maintain social order. So if you do not have close ties, you're more likely to partake in behavior. Here are some of the areas of social bond that you may, that we even here at Cathedral focus in on, such as Mr. Greer's assets that he talks about through your last 3 years here at Cathedral. Attachment, commitment, involvement, and belief. Do you feel attached? Do you have others within the community that you do know, that you see on a daily and day-out basis, that you have some sort of feelings for or interaction with? Commitment. Are those individuals you are committed to do your best with? Involvement. Do you actually have some skin in the game? Something is important to you that you are willing to get involved and engaged in those behaviors. And ultimately, the last one is belief. You have belief in your community that they're there to do good work. When they have those 4 things, you're more likely, your society is more likely to exert control over you, and you will have a community of social order. When these are weak, then we have deviant behavior that comes from the absence of these social bonds. All right, take a moment to stop and to reflect in your readings. You can look on the Google form page that I've provided on Schoology and fill out a couple of the questions there. You also can review in your textbook, or you can go to the online version that I've provided in the Google form to get additional information. Again, you should be able to look at how Cathedral reflects strain theory, give us examples of that. I would also like you to continue on and look at control theory, and in the same way, how does Cathedral reflect control theory itself, and give specific examples for that. Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit of time just looking over some of the key terms from the reading. Labeling theory explains why deviance is relative. In other words, sometimes in gender issues, one would be considered a deviant behavior when the other one would be celebratory. For example, boys and girls relationships, a lot of times the way that's looked at by society, the guy looks differently than the girl does, and those types of behaviors. Primary deviance is a term that's used when one engages in an isolated act or behavior. However, in secondary deviance, it refers to as a lifestyle or personal identity. Many times this might happen when an individual originally does an act but is caught in an illegal act, and then ultimately as a young juvenile then gets sent to, is detained or arrested and sent to a prison type setting, ultimately leading to a new lifestyle and defining themselves as a criminal, and then begins to then take that on as a personal identity. Labeling has negative effects, which are also known as stigma, an undesirable characteristic of a label used by others to deny the deviant full social acceptance. All right, conflict theory's perspective on deviant behavior is saying it's a competition of social inequality, and that those with power then will label those without power as deviant. Again, the civil rights movement could be one of these that you would look for, that the sit-ins, the economic hassle that was given to the people of power, would call that deviant behavior. Here's another term that, again, you might be familiar with, but called white-collar crime, and that is crime that is committed by respectable individuals. A lot of times they would be considered corporate crime, things that are more acceptable in society. That is until recently, because of the Great Recession that we just went through. We have understood that it's the white-collar crime that put us in that situation from the bankers. However, very few prosecuted under the codes that already exist to say this is deviant, this is dangerous for society. So usually white-collar crime is, even though it can be more harmful than the traditional criminal activities, ends up receiving less of a sanction or formal sanction. And then violent crimes. Violent crimes are usually in the lower demographic, and regardless of what you would see put up in the media, most violent crimes are actually, the victims of violent crimes are males from male crime activities. And here is crimes against property, which could be classified into the violence level or even white-collar crime. Arson and vandalism are examples of crime against property, but also you could have embezzlement, receiving of stolen goods, extortion, which is also known as blackmail. The last two types of crime are victimless crimes and organized crime. We will talk about those in our next meeting, along with Section 5 of deviant behavior. So finish up your Google Forms, get those turned into me no later than Wednesday, and then also start working on your study guides or term listings that are included on the Schoolology site. Thanks, and see you Thursday.